I've been on the force for more than 2 decades, but that afternoon still lives in my mind as if it happened yesterday. The sun was dipping low over the Sacramento streets, painting everything in gold. And I remember thinking it was too peaceful a day for anything dramatic. My partner and I were running a routine traffic sweep. Same route, same pace, same silence between us. Then I saw it. A black sedan rolling just a little too slow. Tinted windows darker than regulations allowed. Nothing major, but enough to trigger that instinct you get after years on the job. We signaled him to pull over. No shouting, no drama, just another stop in a long list of forgettable ones. At least, that's what I thought. When the driver stepped out, something in the air changed. He wasn't nervous like most people. He moved calm, measured, like a man who had nothing to hide and nothing to prove. But there was something about him, something that made me pay attention. His posture, his eyes, steady, respectful, but sharp. I couldn't place it then, but I would later. And I'd realized that this wasn't just another driver. It was the moment that would rewrite everything I thought I knew about people, pride, and quiet strength. As I approached his car, I could feel that strange tension, the kind that doesn't come from fear, but from uncertainty. He handed over his license without a word. I remember glancing at his hands. Steady, strong, not trembling like most people do when they see the flashing lights. His ID said Solomon Dryden. The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. Maybe I'd seen it on a report once, or maybe it was just the kind of name that sticks. I did what we always do, asked him to step to the side, keep his hands visible, the usual. He nodded once and followed every instruction, respectful but firm. Still, there was something in the air, like an invisible line being drawn. My partner whispered, "He's got that look. Military, maybe?" I shrugged. I'd seen a few veterans on traffic stops, but this guy, he carried himself differently. There was no arrogance, no defensiveness, just quiet confidence, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. When the other officers arrived, things started to shift. One of the guards, a younger guy, told Solomon to step back and open his trunk. The moment he did, I caught something in his expression, a flicker of disbelief. Not anger, just disappointment. He said softly, "You don't have to do this, son." It wasn't a threat, it was advice. That's when my gut twisted, because it wasn't just what he said. It was how he said it. Calm, controlled, like a man who'd led others before. Seconds later, I found out just how right that feeling was. What happened next? I still replay it sometimes. Not because it was loud or chaotic, but because it was silent. That kind of silence that makes your chest feel heavy, like the air itself is watching. The young guard had stepped closer to Solomon, his tone a little sharper now, maybe trying to show authority. But Solomon didn't flinch. He just looked him in the eye, calm as ever, and said, "You really don't want to do this." And then, from the corner of my eye, I noticed movement. 6 men standing near the back of the crowd, spaced out, but aligned like they trained for it. They weren't panicking, they weren't yelling, they just stood up. No one told them to, no signal, just instinct. I remember thinking they all looked different. Same posture, same intensity, same quiet readiness. It wasn't until one of them reached into his jacket and pulled out a small insignia, the kind I hadn't seen in years, that it clicked. Navy SEALs. My stomach dropped. You don't mistake that emblem once you've seen it. These weren't random bystanders. They were brothers in arms. And suddenly it made sense. Solomon wasn't just a veteran. He was their brother. The kind of man who didn't need backup because he already was the backup for others. The younger guard froze when he saw them. 6 men, not saying a single word, not moving toward anyone, just standing there, hands visible, eyes locked. The whole room went still. Even the noise of the city outside seemed to fade away. I looked at my partner, and for the first time that day, he looked unsure. Like maybe we just crossed into something far bigger than a routine stop. And in that silence, Solomon spoke again, barely above a whisper. "You can stand down, boys." But they didn't move, because that's what loyalty looks like when it's been tested in fire. I've seen hundreds of faces during my years in uniform. Some I remember, most I don't. But the moment Solomon looked at me that day, I felt something shift. It wasn't fear, it was recognition, a kind that hits you deeper than logic. His eyes carried that calm you only see in people who've lived through the kind of chaos the rest of us only read about. He didn't have to say it, but I could tell. This man had seen things, done things that left their mark. You don't stand like that unless you've carried others through hell and made it back alive. The way the SEALs looked at him, it wasn't respect out of rank or command. It was something rarer. Reverence. The kind men reserve for someone who once pulled them out of the fire and didn't let go until they were safe. When I finally pieced it together, my throat went dry. Solomon Dryden? The name I'd heard in briefings years ago, attached to a mission that went wrong somewhere off the coast. Classified, they'd said. But among the ranks, stories spread. A Marine commander who refused to leave his men behind. A man who walked out of a place no one should have survived, carrying two of his team on his shoulders. And now, there he was, standing quietly in front of me, wearing nothing but humility and a father's pride. I remember lowering my hand from my holster, not because I felt threatened, but because suddenly I didn't feel worthy to even be standing that way. The young guard beside me hadn't realized it yet, but I could see it in the SEAL's eyes. They weren't angry, they were ready to protect the man who once saved their lives. The air felt different, like the weight of what we'd done finally landed. This wasn't about protocol anymore. It was about respect, about knowing when you're in the presence of someone who's already given more than you ever could. And in that moment, all I could think was, how did we not know who we were talking to? But that wasn't the end of it. Because just when I thought things couldn't get any more humbling, Solomon did something that changed everything again. When Solomon stepped forward, every muscle in the room tensed. No one knew what was coming next. But instead of anger, instead of the pushback we'd braced for, he did something none of us expected. He smiled. Not the kind of smile you give to break tension, but the kind that says, "It's all right, son. You didn't know." He turned to the young guard, the same one who'd been ready to escort him out, and said softly, "I fought so you could stand where you're standing. So don't apologize. Just remember what that uniform means." His tone was calm, but it hit harder than any command. Every person in that hall felt it, that weight of quiet leadership, the kind that doesn't need volume to be heard. The SEALs behind him stayed still, but their eyes softened. You could see it, a mix of pride and pain and history. Solomon reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a medal, worn and scratched. He looked at it for a moment, then handed it to the young guard. "This one isn't for me anymore. It's for whoever wears that badge with a clean heart." No one spoke. The entire room, officers, families, graduates, just stood there, holding their breath. The young guard took the medal like it was made of glass, unsure what to say. Solomon didn't wait for thanks. He just turned back toward the crowd, found his son in the front row, and nodded. The boy's eyes were shining, and I swear even the hardest men in that hall had to look away for a second. That's when I realized real power isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention. It commands it by presence alone. Solomon didn't just diffuse a situation, he taught a lesson we'll never forget. And just when the silence was about to settle again, something unexpected happened. Something that showed us all exactly who this man really was, beyond the medals, beyond the stories. I thought the story ended there. A simple misunderstanding turned into a moment of grace. But life has a strange way of reminding you that some encounters aren't accidents. Just as Solomon turned to leave, his son stood up from his seat in the front row. You could see it, that same calm, steady presence his father had. The boy walked toward him, the crowd parting like it was choreographed. And when he reached his father, he saluted. Not playfully, not out of habit, but with full respect. Solomon's hand trembled for a second before returning the salute, slow and deliberate. Then his son said, just loud enough for everyone to hear, "Everything I am is because of you." It was quiet, but it echoed through the hall like a bell, the kind of sentence that sinks into people and stays there. I caught myself swallowing hard, pretending I had something in my eye. Around me, I could see officers and Marines blinking fast, trying to keep their composure. Solomon put his hand on his son's shoulder and said, "Then make sure you give that same respect to the ones who come after you." That was it. No speech, no applause cue, just that. Then he turned back toward the exit and started walking, his back straight, every step deliberate. And right before he reached the door, the commander of the SEALs, the one who'd stood silently through it all, called out, "Room! Attention!" The sound was instant, thunderous. Every Navy SEAL, every Marine, every officer in that hall snapped to attention as Solomon walked out. Not because they were ordered to, but because they wanted to. That was the last time I ever saw him. Word got around later, Solomon passed quietly in his sleep 2 years after that day. When I heard, I found myself driving back to that same base. The hall was empty, but I could still picture him standing there, medal in hand, teaching all of us a lesson no manual ever could. You see, I've pulled over a lot of people in my career. Some angry, some scared, some broken. But that day, I met a man who reminded me what service really means. It's not about the medals, the stripes, or the salutes. It's about humility and the kind of strength that doesn't need to prove itself. And I'll never forget the day we pulled him over. Years have passed since that day, but it's strange how some memories never fade. They just grow quieter, heavier, like echoes that never really stop. I've worn the badge for over 20 years now. But every time I see that blue and gold reflection in my rearview mirror, I think of Solomon Dryden. Before that day, I thought I understood what honor meant. I thought it was about rank, precision, and doing things by the book. But Solomon taught me that real honor isn't something you wear, it's something you live. It's in how you treat people who owe you nothing, how you carry yourself when no one's watching, and how you forgive someone who doesn't even know they've disrespected you. That moment changed the way I handled every stop afterward. When I pull someone over now, I take a breath before I speak. I look them in the eyes. I remind myself, you don't know their story. You don't know the battles they fought quietly, the medals they never show. Because Solomon looked at me that day and didn't see a uniform. He saw a person. And in return, he made me want to be one again. His words still come back sometimes, when I'm standing in the rain beside a car window, or watching new recruits walking to the academy, full of that mix of pride and fear. I tell them the same thing he told that young guard. Remember what that uniform means. And sometimes when I see their faces soften, when they really get it, I feel like a small part of him still walks among us. Because that's the thing about moments like that. They don't just end, they ripple. They pass through the people who witnessed them, shaping who they become. And even if the world forgets Solomon Dryden's name, the men and women who stood in that hall that day never will. Every time I clip on my badge, I whispered under my breath. Not as a memory, but as a promise. I'll never forget the day we pulled him over. It's been years since I last saw that man's face, but his lesson follows me like a shadow I don't want to lose. Sometimes, late at night, when the roads are quiet and the radio hums low, I think about how close we came to missing it, that quiet reminder of what service and decency really mean. We were trained to act fast, to read danger, to stay alert. But no one trains you to recognize grace when it's standing right in front of you. I used to think being a good officer was about control, keeping things steady, predictable, safe. But Solomon taught me something far deeper. Control means nothing without compassion. Authority means nothing without humility. The day we pulled him over wasn't a test of power. It was a test of perspective, and we almost failed it. Over the years, I've seen men earn medals, rise through ranks, and retire into silence, but not many leave behind something that outlives them. Solomon did. Not through orders or speeches, but through a single act of understanding. He turned what could have been a confrontation into a moment of humanity that changed everyone there, including me. His story still makes its way through the academy. The younger officers whisper about the Marine and the SEALs like it's a legend. They don't always know the details, and that's all right. What matters isn't the story, it's the spirit behind it. The idea that true strength doesn't need to prove itself. It just stands tall, calm, and kind. Sometimes I wonder what he'd say if he knew how much he changed us. I think he'd just smile and say, "Good, then you were listening." And maybe that's what keeps me going all these years later. The quiet belief that every day, every stop, every small act of patience might be the moment someone else remembers for the rest of their life. Because the truth is, heroes don't always come with fanfare or headlines. Sometimes they just walk away, leaving behind silence and a lesson that never leaves you. And so I keep driving, the echo of that day still steady in my chest. I'll never forget the day we pulled him over. And I hope I never do.